Welcome back to the CS160 programming tutorial. In this video, we're going to take a look at the typical structure and content of a programming assignment with a focus on the tutorial assignment we're going to be addressing. Most programming assignments that you'll receive in CS160 are divided into the following sections. First, the learning outcomes. Your syllabus should contain all the learning outcomes for CS160. And each of your assignments, whether they're lab assignments or programming projects, should specify a list of the learning outcomes that are going to be reinforced by the assignment. Secondly, there's going to be a problem description, and that's going to be a narrative of the problem to be solved. There's a textual description, and it typically is accompanied by examples. You may not be familiar with the problem domain. For example, our tutorial project is going to be talking about credit card payments. Well, you might not know anything about credit card payments or how interest on credit cards is determined or anything about how long it might take you to pay off a credit card balance. The problem description is to give you some context. So even if you don't know anything about the problem domain, there will be enough description there for you to be able to solve the problem or address the functional and technical requirements required of the solution. The major section of the programming assignment will be the requirements themselves. And the requirements section is typically divided into three subsections. The first are the functional requirements. And the functional requirements define what the program must do. It's typically a numbered list written in the imperative style and may be accompanied by examples. Secondly would be the technical requirements. This is what the code must look like. That is, it specifies what Java features must be used. Like, you have to define name constants. The variables need to be named in a certain way. Do you have to use certain Java classes? Okay, these will all be specified in the technical requirements. Finally, we'll have documentation requirements. These are comments that you have to add to your code to explain what the code does or how it works. And typically the documentation requirements are divided into two kinds. One is the header documentation that gives an overview of what the program does, and then there are internal comments that describe how the program operates. That is, describes major sections of your program logic. You may also have a design section. A design section may have two kinds of information. First, the classes and methods that must be implemented, and we know that a Java program is going to have at least one class, and many of your CS160 assignments will only have one class, and we know that class is going to have a main method. Secondly, will be one or more high-level algorithms for guiding your coding process. In the beginning, these algorithms might be fairly detailed, but as you gain experience, the amount of guidance you're going to be given in the design section here will be diminished. The next part of the tutorial we'll cover will be understanding the programming assignment. Well, unless you understand the programming assignment, it's going to be impossible for you to construct a correct Java program. And one of the best ways to determine if you're ready for the coding process is to solve the problem yourself. That is, to solve it manually. If you can't solve it, you can't write a program to solve it. For many, if not all, of the CS160 programming assignments, this can be done by carefully tracing through the algorithm in the design section. That is, you can play computer and you can, quote unquote, execute the steps of the algorithm. And if you understand what those steps of the algorithm imply with respect to the behavior of the program, then you can trace through from the inputs through the computations to the outputs. By doing that, that's going to ensure that you understand all the functional and technical requirements and how they relate to the steps of the algorithm. When you're doing this, you should be asking the questions or answering them for your own good. What parts of the algorithm address input requirements? What are the inputs? Where do they come from? And what are the kinds of data? Are they ints? Are they doubles? Are they strings? Which of those steps and which requirements address the computational requirements? What formulas are involved? Do I understand them? Is there some ambiguity about it? Do I need some clarification? Can I carry out those computations either with paper and pencil or with the calculator? And which steps address the output requirements? What are the outputs? How are the outputs sequenced? What comes first? What comes second? Do I have to have all the inputs and perform all the computations before I can do any of the outputs? Or can they be interleaved somehow? Finally, this is a good time to figure out whether or not you understand what Java features are required and whether or not you know them. Are going to have to do, some additional study to bring yourself up to speed. Now, because all your programs are going to have input computational output requirements, you are going to have to know something about scanners or files, about assignment statements, arithmetic expressions, math library, system.out, print line, output files, and a whole host of methods that might be involved with operations on strings, ints, doubles, and so forth. So you should be able to reproduce the outputs of the sample runs by following the steps of the algorithm. And if you have difficulty doing this, then you need to seek help in understanding a particular requirement or algorithmic step. And I will say this. We professors, we are charged with creating your programming assignments, and we try to be as clear as possible in specifying the requirements. But what's clear to us might not be clear to you. What's unambiguous to us might be ambiguous to you. So it's always appropriate to ask for clarification of a particular requirement. You might also need to review or seek help with particular Java features. Of course, you can resort to your textbook. You can resort to sample code from Gaddis or your instructor. You can Google things. There's plenty of help available on Java features online. You can also drop by your instructor's office hours or drop by and talk to one of our teaching assistants. Okay, so let's take a look at understanding this particular programming assignment. Now, I've assumed that you've already carefully read the tutorial programming assignment that's available in the Tutorial 1 folder. So I want to just take a look at a couple of steps in the tutorial assignments algorithm. That's found in the design section. So here are steps 4, 5, and 6 from there. Okay, I won't read them. You can read them here. So I'm kind of pretending I'm going to go ahead and work through this algorithm to see if I understand the requirements and the steps of the algorithm and what Java I might need in order to construct a solution. So if I take a look at step 4, that refers directly to a Java feature for reading data from the keyboard, right? So what things might be bouncing around in my head at this point? Well, do I know what a scanner object is? Do I know how to declare a scanner object? Do I know how to instantiate a scanner object? And do I know in that instantiation how to invoke the constructor to direct the scanner object to obtain data from the keyboard? So even though it seems to be a very simple step here, there's a lot going on. But it's just one step. And if I can answer those questions, I'm pretty confident I can write the Java to implement that step. Now, step 5 is a different kind of algorithmic step because this step corresponds directly to a functional requirement, and it's functional requirement number 1. And in functional requirement number 1 specifies the display of a welcome message. Now, I have to read functional requirement 1 or review functional requirement 1 because this algorithmic step is written at a fairly abstract level. It doesn't tell me what the content of that welcome message is. So do I understand what the content of the welcome message must be? And with respect to display, do I know what Java feature can be used to display the welcome message? And on what device should it be displayed? And finally, for step number 6, that also refers back to a functional requirement. It happens to be functional requirement number 2. Step 5 was an output requirement. Step 6 is an input requirement, but it also contains within it an output requirement. That is, do I know what solicit means? Solicit really is a synonym for prompt. Typically, if we're dealing with keyboard input, we're going to prompt the user with some kind of message that lets the user know what we expect the user to type in. But do I know what that means? Not only that solicit means I have to prompt the user, but do I know what the content of that prompt should be? Do I know exactly what the inputs are? What is the first, middle, and last name? What data type is that? What order will they be entered? The functional requirement should dictate all of that. Do I know what Java feature can be used to solicit the inputs? Do I know what Java feature can be used to read the inputs? The answers to all these questions are going to be necessary for me to compose the correct Java statement or statements that implement that step of the algorithm and consequently satisfy that functional requirement. Now, often the critical steps of the algorithm involve computations. And by critical, they might be the most challenging or difficult steps. Consider the following 2 steps of the algorithm. These are steps 10 and 11. For step 11, I've actually only reproduced the first part of that. Step 11 is a very complex step of the algorithm. Let's take a look at these 2 things. First, well, step 10. That actually refers to the daily interest rate defined in figure 1 of the problem description. That is, you won't see any reference to daily interest rate directly in the functional requirements. It's only inferred by step 11. Okay. So if I don't carefully read the entire tutorial assignment, or in general the programming assignment, I might not know what the heck that refers to. Okay, so that's why it's very important to read every part of the assignment. All right, given that I've done that, do I understand what the term daily interest rate means? because that is a technical term from the problem domain of, computing the remaining balance of a credit card. Do I know how it is used in the credit card equation? The credit card equation is what's shown in figure 1. And secondly, do I know how to calculate the daily interest rate given the APR? Well, in figure 1, daily interest rate is defined by a simple formula that involves APR. Oh, by the way, you also have to know what APR is. An APR, if you read the assignment carefully, APR refers to the annual percentage rate, and that just happens to be one of the input requirements. Step 11 is perhaps the most critical step of the algorithm, and it refers to functional requirement 6. And this also appears in figure 1. So do I understand all the terms in the equation that's shown in figure 1 and where they come from? Figure 1, besides containing the interest rate term, also has a term representing the customer's payment, representing the credit card balance. It also has a mathematical function, the natural log. So do I know how to calculate the number of months given this equation? That is, can I evaluate that equation if I plug in values for balance and payment and interest, where that interest is derived from APR? And by do I know how to calculate, I mean, can I actually sit down with some data values from one of the sample runs, plug them into that equation, and since it involves a natural log, probably have to use a calculator and get the number of months. Now, if I can do that manually, I might also want to consider at this point, do I know what Java features are needed to implement the equation? As you'll see in that equation, they're just the regular mathematical operations. You get times, plus, minus, divide, but there's also natural log, and there's also that expression that's raised to a power. How do I do that in Java? Where does that come from? Am I familiar enough with the math class to know what I need? Now, I recommend that you take some time now and see if you can trace through the algorithm with the input data from sample runs number 1 and number 2 and obtain the correct outputs. Of course, you're going to need to make some assumptions about the actual Java code you will eventually construct. That is, the decimal format object is going to use, we're going to use that to format the dollar values. Well, when you do your calculations, you're going to play the decimal format object. So when you look at the report that comes out, whatever you come up with your calculator, you can just appropriately round to the dollars and cents you need. Now, the focus of this exercise, because it's going to take some time, is on whether or not you understand how to produce the outputs from the inputs using the given computational formulas. If you can do this, you can feel fairly confident that you understand the programming assignment, you understand the algorithm, and you understand the relationship between the inputs, the computations, and the outputs. Now you should feel fairly confident that you're ready to move on to the coding phase. So the next thing we'll take a look at is how to apply the programming process.